we've been focusing on the issues that matter most to Canadians, to people in the middle class, people working hard to join the middle class. We've been focused on housing. We've been focused on the cost of living. We've been focused on economic growth that delivers those good jobs that are the basis for a good life.
Welcome back to a special edition of Power Play. We're live in Montreal. Federal cabinet has been meeting at a retreat underway just behind me for the past 2 days. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, as you heard there, responding to the cost of living focus at this cabinet retreat. The government is preparing to face the House of Commons next week and deliver a budget in the coming months. We sat down with two of the top economists that ministers brought in today, right after they briefed cabinet. Armine Yalnizyan is the Atkinson Fellow on the Future of Workers at the Atkinson Foundation, and Kevin Milligan is an economics professor at the Vancouver School of Economics at the University of British Columbia. Hi there, so good to see both of you.
Great to be here.
I appreciate you making the time. Kevin, I think I'd start with you, and I wanted to ask you, I feel like anecdotally, just in my job, there's so much economic angst out there. I know some of the data obviously bears that out. Do you have the sense that, relatively speaking, there is a higher level of economic angst among Canadians at the moment? And is it justified from where you sit?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of angst out there, and I think it is justified. We've just been through like the economic shock of a century with the pandemic, and with the impact of the pandemic on people's lives, and then after the pandemic with the inflation episode that we had. This is a really major economic shock. And so people have been adjusting to it. And what's interesting to me is kind of where we are right now and kind of at a crossroads as the inflation is coming back down now. And the question is, what is the economy going to look like for the next 5 years, for the next 10 years? And can we get on a track where we have middle class incomes growing and we have Canadians getting back onto the track of building a good economic life for themselves?
I want to dig a little bit deeper in if those should be the objectives or what the objectives should be, because I think often Canadians are confronted with a reality and a message that from a macro perspective, it's not that bad, particularly relative to other industrialized countries, but they don't feel that way in their day-to-day life. I mean, what should the objective be when it comes to economic growth? Should it be a more equitable distribution of it? Should it be, like, what kind of things should the federal government be geared towards?
I think part of what has happened since the global financial crisis in 2008-9 is the commodification of housing. And housing is such a basic part of our lives that people that own homes are kind of sweating because roughly 50% of the mortgages that are out there that need to be renegotiated are going to happen this year and next. Exactly when unemployment starts tracking up, everybody's saying that we might be in a recession right now as we're speaking, but it's sure not going to get any more pretty in the next little while. It might ease up in the next little while, but when will interest rates come down, and how far will they come down, and how far will that cascade into rents, which brings me to the second issue. We've gone from an ownership society to a whole bunch of people in the society being owned by the way capitalism works, and that's the 25 to 40-year-olds. And nobody's really talking to them directly about how to ease their life. So yes, it's partly about income inequality and redistribution, but a lot of it is take the basics out of the market, offset some of the costs, as we did with childcare, as we're doing with dental care, as we might do with pharmacare, and stop the privatization of the other elements of the care economy, like long-term care, childcare, and health care, so that we pay as little as possible and focus that money on good quality care.
So let me just jump off that and ask you, Kevin, because I think that there is a sort of other discussion happening about the constraints that surround government and their ability to do so. The way Armine describes it, I interpret that in layman's terms as maybe an expanded role of government with a focus on improving aspects of people's lives that are facing, struggle right now. How would you counter the criticism that an expanded role of government isn't a good fiscal policy to pursue?
When I look at, the way that Canada's fiscal policy sits compared to other countries, compared to the kind of metrics that economists like to use, it's actually in a pretty good place. In that we have a deficit that's in the neighborhood of 1.5%, 1.8% of GDP. And thinking about that, whether it's 1.8 or 1.9 and getting really excited about that, I don't think that's where the bond markets are. They're not going to worry if we had a slightly higher deficit. And it's also not going to hit Canadians in the checkbook too much because the cost of borrowing is still relatively low compared to history. So when I think about that, we have some room, some fiscal capacity there. The question is what you're going to spend it on. If you're going to throw it overboard, that's not good. We want to make sure that we do it on things that help Canadians. And one way we can do that is by expanding the capacity of our economy. So a proof point of that is think of the childcare initiative that was put in place in 2021, 2022. We saw some billions of dollars being spent. That was fiscal capacity being used. What we've seen, though, is that women, especially women with kids, are at the highest ever level in Canadian history for labor force participation. We have 10 percentage points higher labor force participation for women in Canada compared to the United States. This is great for Canadian women. This is great for our economy. That's the kind of way you can use fiscal capacity to grow our economy.
If I understand it correctly, it's almost about, to use kind of a cheesy term, like return on investment, right? If we're going to expand the role of government, there needs to be a substantial return on investment for Canadians. What's another example in your mind, Armine, of something the federal government can pursue going forward that would do that?
Basically protect the amount of affordable housing we have, prevent further erosion of the stock, because you do not want to see people that were in the middle class falling out of the middle class because of the cost of housing and then finding themselves homeless. We are seeing a real tick up in the number of homeless people and people that never thought they would be homeless. This is preventable because once you get into that status, it's very hard to get into the housing market again. And then there's all sorts of cascades of costs. Once people become underhoused, badly housed, then they get sicker quicker. And so we end up paying more anyway. If we pay up front, it's like what your grandma said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
So just quickly to follow up on that, what does that mean from a tangible perspective? Does it mean going beyond, for example, using federal money to incentivize quicker construction at municipal levels? Does it mean direct federal government investment in housing stock and the type of housing stock that's created? How do you envision that?
I think we need to take more of the housing stock out of the market. That means federal governments that invest in buying and building. Now, the building will happen through private sector. But who owns the asset? If it's so great for developers, why isn't it great for taxpayers? It's a steady flow of income. So why aren't we owning more of the stock that we need in the part of the market that business does not want to invest in because the math doesn't work? We can do this, and we can actually have returns on investment for ourselves. And frankly, one of the greatest sources of equity for this is our pension plans. They invest elsewhere. Why don't they invest in Canada?
Is there a way for the federal government to do that now, Kevin, that will produce results that have an impact in the short term or the near term versus the long term, which is what a lot of the supply generating activities now are designed to impact?
Yeah, that's a challenge sometimes. Yeah. Economic policy doesn't work on a political timetable, but it's not just politics, right? People are hurting and feeling those stresses right now, and they want to see a path, towards a better future. And so I think that putting in place things that allow people to envision that trajectory, get back on a good trajectory, whether it's people who aren't housed and getting them into that trajectory of into housing, whether that's a student who gets a federal government funded internship or something like that, that gets them into a trajectory, into that career, into that job that ends up leading them into the middle class. That's the kind of thing people want, is to see some hope, some trajectory. So there are some things today that could be done that start that trajectory.
Yeah, frankly, we could be making every job a good job in the care economy where 20% of the labor force already works. It's like the base of the middle class in the 50s to the 70s was manufacturing. 20% of the labor force worked in manufacturing, and we made many of those jobs terrific jobs. If we did the same thing to the care economy, people providing long-term care, child care, and health care, we could be building basically from the bottom up and middle out the type of economy that supports everyone.
I have like 15 seconds. How do they do that?
Absolutely, you need governments to invest in it. This cannot be done through the market.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Thank you very much, both of you, for sharing your perspectives today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's Armine Yalnizyan and Kevin Milligan, both of whom briefed cabinet this afternoon. Coming up, some of the other political